Alright, I hope you're ready to get started. We will start with a blank Laravel project, so head to laravel.com and click on Get Started, which will take you to the installation instructions. Now, how you have to set up Laravel can depend a bit on the operating system you're using, but I will use Composer, the PHP package manager, to install a new Laravel project. So I'll paste this command in my terminal. During this course, we will create a simple task manager. So the name I will give my project will be simply task manager, and run the command, which installs all the required packages for the Laravel project. Now let's head into this directory. Now besides Laravel, I will also install another package, Laravel IDE helper, which makes sure that auto-completion properly works in the editor that I'll use, which is gonna be Visual Studio Code. So let's install that and open up my editor. Now in here, let's run the server command, which is php artisan serve, which will run a development server on port 8000. So let's head back to the browser and go to localhost.8000, and you will see the intro page from the Laravel application. Now, if this runs correctly, you're all set up. And notice that I will be using Laravel 10 with PHP 8.1 during this course. Hope to see you in the next video. Welcome to this video. Here we will add a first route to our Laravel REST API. And therefore we're gonna need a model, migration, and a controller. So open up a new terminal and head to the project folder and run the php artisan make command to create a task model with a controller and a migration. Now let's fill in the migration first. So head into the database directory and open up the newly created migration file. Now for tasks, we're gonna require a title, which is gonna be a string value, and a isDone value, which is gonna be a Boolean. And we will default this to false. Now during this course, or at least at the start of the course, I'm not gonna bother with setting up a database, so I will use SQLite. So change that in your env file, and let's run this migration using php artisan migrate and create the SQLite database. Next, we need to set up a action in the task controller. So we'll go there and we're just gonna add a action that returns all the tasks in our database. And this is gonna be a index method, and we will return a response. And for our API, we want to respond with JSON. So let's add there. And from the task model, we're just going to return all the tasks. And notice that I'm using auto imports here in VS Code. So if you don't have that set up, you'll need to add this line manually, the use app models task. Next, we need a route to this controller, and therefore we're going to be in our API routes file. So go there, and this is going to be a route using the HTTP GET method, and the URI will be tasks, and second we're going to use the task controller, and notice again the auto import, and we want to hit the index method. So let's enter that there and go to the browser. Hopefully you have your dev server still running. If we now go to api.tasks, you'll see a empty response, and I'm using a browser extension here, JSON viewer, to format the response a bit more neatly. Now the routes that you create in your API routes file are going to be prefixed with API. So that's why that's included here. It would be nice to actually show some content here. So let's head back to our editor and open up the Artisan Tinker shell to manually create a new task. Using the task model, and that didn't work. I think I need to run composer dump autoload. Let's try that again. Yes, now the task model is alias to the proper namespace. So for this task, let's set a title of do my homework and save the task. And now it should be present in the response that we're getting from our task CRUD. And as you see, now it is here. Hello, welcome back. This was the state in which we left at the previous video, with a JSON representation of the model that we just created. Now Laravel has a built-in mechanism to manage how this representation looks, called resources. So let's head back into our terminal and create resources for the tasks. And we use the artisan make command to make a task resource and a task collection. The first thing that we'll do is head back to our task controller, and instead of this response, return the task collection. So let's make a new instance of that task collection, and in here we will pass all the tasks that we created. Now second, let's go back to our browser, and now you'll see that the task model is nested into a data key, and this is going to be nice when we add pagination later. Now let's go to the resource classes that we just created. The task collection, it returns just the toArray method that is defined in the resource collection class from Laravel. And let's now look at our task resources. Now here we can make some changes to how this data looks like, of how the representation of task is made in a task collection. So let's add, for example, a status field, which is gonna be finished or open depending on the state of the task. And the fields that we call this are proxied onto the model. So we can use isDone, which is a field on the task model, and check whether that is true. And in that case, we're gonna return finished. And otherwise, we will set it to open and return that data. So now you'll see in our request that this status field is added depending on the status of isDone. Now something else, I see that the isDone field, which is actually Boolean, returns 0 here. So let's go to our task model, and it doesn't show up there. Let's go to the models, tasks, and we are gonna cast this field to a Boolean. So add a protected cast value, and for here the isDone field will need to be casted to a Boolean. Now in here we can also hide fields from the JSON representation. So for example, let's hide the updated add field, and therefore we define the hidden property, which is also an array, updated add. And if we now look in our response, refresh that, then we'll see that is done is now a Boolean value, and the updated add value is removed from this response. With that, I hope to see you in the next video. Besides showing a list of resources, you normally want to interact with a REST resource in a couple of standard ways. You want to be able to create a resource, update one, delete one, or show a resource. And that is what we'll do in this video. Since these actions are so common, Laravel has a convenient way to define resource routes for you. You can define a resource route, and in your controller it expects a couple of actions or methods, which will map onto the routes that Laravel generates for you. Now, for a regular web application, you also need pages for forms to create a resource or edit a resource. Now, for APIs, we don't need these routes. For this, Laravel has API resources. We can define an API resource in a routes file, and we'll get the routes that we need to manage our resource. So let's copy this line into our routes file. Instead of the line we had here, we are going to manage our tasks resource, and they need to end up in our task controller. Now, we don't want to expose routes to our application for which we don't have actions into our controller. So we're going to tell Laravel that we only need the index route and the show route for now, to show the single resource. If we now head into our terminal and list the available routes using the route list command, we'll see that there's a route set up to show a single task resource, which ends up at the task controller and the show method. So let's add this method to our task controller. From this controller action, we want to return our single task resource. So we're going to use the task resource class that we created before, and notice that this is auto imported for me, so maybe you need to do that manually. And in this task resource, we're going to pass the task, and we're going to make use of Laravel's route model binding to automatically inject the task model into our controller action. So in the URL that we're using, we're going to use the task ID, and by using this type hint, Laravel understands that we want the model directly into our controller method here. So it automatically fetches it from the database for us. So let's save that and go back to our browser. And now if we're gonna change the URL and add the ID of the resource, which is 1, we'll see that we get the single resource returned. So before, notice the square brackets here on line 5. This is a list of resources, and this is a single resource. Now, if we go to a second one with ID 2, which doesn't exist in my database, we get a 404 not found error. This is correct because the model doesn't exist, so we want Laravel to return a 404 error. However, the client that will consume our REST API doesn't have any use for a HTML page when such an error occurs. We want to return JSON instead. Now, we get an HTML page because we make this request in the browser. So Laravel expects us to want HTML returned. Now, in this case, we don't want that, and we actually need to make this request in Postman. So in here, I will first add a new variable for the domain that we're using, which in my case is http local host and I run on port 8000, and I'll create a new request to show the resource. It's going to be a HTTP GET request. Use the domain or the variable that we just created, and the request has the route API tasks and ID of 2 to show the 404 error. Now, to tell Laravel that we want JSON returned, we need to add a header, the accept header, with the value of application JSON. If we now send this request, you'll see that we get a message back as JSON. Oops, that wasn't intended. Now there's a lot of information here, and this is due to the fact that in our env file, app debug is set to true. So in production, if you set this to false and send the request, you'll notice that you just get a simple error message and not all the details from the environment that we're running. Now I'll set this back to true for now, and also make a request to the resource that does exist, and you'll see that here we also get a nice JSON representation of our tasks resource. Hope to see you in the next video. Now the next thing is that we're gonna allow to create tasks via our API. And for this we first gonna need to be in our API routes file. Now in here, add the store action, which will allow us to store new tasks. And if we go to our list command, you'll see that there's now a new entry here to the store method of our task controller. And also notice that it has the same route as the index action, so the list of routes, but this requires us to use a HTTP post request. Now let's go to our tasks controller and add this store action. The first thing we want to do here is validate that the user or the client posted the correct data to this store method, which allows us to create an actual task model. So let's use Laravel's request validation for that. And we can call the validate method and pass rules for the title. And this is going to be a required field because it is also required in our database, and it will need to have a maximum amount of 255 characters because this is also the maximum string length in our database. Now with this we can create a new task. So let's call the create method on the task, and in here we're going to pass the validated data, and what we will return is the new task resource, and pass in the newly created task. Now something else that we need to do is in our task model, in here we're going to need to add the title to the fillable fields for mass assignment, and we'll do that by defining the fillable property, which is going to be an array, and here we will add the title field. Do this because we want to restrict the fields that can be set using a mass assignment. So in here we just pass an array of all the fields that need to be set on the newly created task, and certain fields should not be allowed to set in such a manner. Think about the created at and updated at timestamps, for example. We should not be able to change them in such a manner. Now head over to Postman and create a new request for our store method, and we're going to use a HTTP post for that. We're gonna post to API/tasks, and we're gonna need to pass the title as a request body, and that will be JSON, and there needs to be a title field. Let's actually set this to JSON to get some nice syntax highlighting, and the value of the title is going to be learn for an exam. Now let's post this, and we see that we get a newly created resource back, a newly created task. Now if we would leave this empty, you'll notice that we get a validation error, and we need to actually set the accept header here as well to application JSON. And you'll see that we get a 422 unprocessable content response code back with the error message that the title field is a required field. Now if we also make a request for the index method, which will actually use the same URL, we see that in the list of resources, now this one is included as well, the second task that we created. Now let's go back to VS Code. So in our task controller, we do the validation, or we define the validation rules in line here, which is totally fine. But Laravel also has a built-in way to do this. And for that, we're gonna make a new request class using the artisan make command. And we will call this store task request. And you'll notice that here we get a new request class, and let's move our validation rule in there, and we're gonna authorize this request by default. So later on with permissions, you want to allow this maybe based on the permissions that the user has in your application, but for now on we will allow all the users to make this request. Now in our task controller, instead of using this generic request class, we will use the store task request, and instead of validate, we need to call validated. Now let's go back to Postman one more time and check that this still works. In our body, let's create a new task, wait for my grade, and send this request, and also pay attention that we now get a 201 response. Actually, this should have been here before with the second task, or the one that we created before, which signals that a new resource has been created. I hope to see you in the next video. Next thing that we'll add is the ability to update a resource. So let's first create a route for that again. So in our API routes file, let's add the update action here. And in our task controller, let's set up the update method. Just like with the store action, we're gonna add a request class for this. So instead of a store task request, we will now add an update task request, and we will authorize this one as well. And for the validation rules, we'll add validation again for the title field. So in this case, the title, we expect that sometimes, meaning that we can leave it out of the request and only validate it when it is present, and otherwise it's going to be required, and still it needs to have a maximum amount of characters of 255. And for is done, We also expect this sometimes, so we can also leave that out of the request if we only want to change the title. And this will be a Boolean. And just like what we did before, we now gonna need to add is done to the fillable fields. And with that, let's head back to our task controller. In here, we gonna need to use the update task request, and instead of getting the ID from the route, we are gonna use the route model binding again. So we directly get the task in here. First, validate the request. So once again, we'll make sure that we only get the validated data. And next, we're gonna update the task with the data that we just received. And we will return again the task resource, the updated task resource. All right, let's head back to Postman and see how this performs. So I will add a new request in Postman. And this is gonna be a put request. And the task ID will be 3 in this case. So that will be this resource, for which we set the title to wait for my grades. So let's send a put request. Now let's not make the same mistake again. First add the accept header. Now in our request body, we are gonna add JSON, and let's set this task to done. So we need is done here and set that to true. Send the request, and now in the response we see that this task is set to true. And we can also change the title to register for the resit. And we see that the title changes too. If we try to set the title to null, so send a request, you would notice that we get a validation error. So before, this field was not validated because we did not pass it into the request, and it was also not changed. But now that we try to set it to null, the title field is actually in the request and gets validated, and we don't allow this field to be null using our validation rules. I hope to see you in the next video. The last thing that we need to do to complete all of our CRUD actions is to add the destroy method, or allow to delete resources from our REST API. So let's first head to the API routes, and now that we get them all, let's just remove the only in there. And now you'll see that besides the list, we can store, show, update, and destroy a resource. So let's go back to our task controller and add this destroy method. Instead of the ID from our route, we are going to use route model binding again and directly get the task. And on that task, we will just call the delete method, which removes the task from our database. And what we will return is a no content response. I think there's not much of a point to return the deleted task. So instead, I'm gonna respond with no content, which is a HTTP 204 status code. Now let's head over to Postman again and add a request, which will be for deleting a task. We will use the HTTP delete method, and we will need the same route as for the update method here, but it's just a different HTTP method, and send the request. And you will now see there's nothing in the request body that we get returned. You see a status 204. And if we now head over to the index route, the one with ID 3 is not showing up in this list because we made this request before. So let's also delete task with ID 2 and fetch the list of tasks again. And now you'll notice that that task is removed as well. With that, I hope to see you in the next video. Welcome to this next section. In this section, we're going to look at the index method of our task controller. So the list of tasks that are returned by our API. What we do now is simply show all the records that are in our database. Currently, that's not much of a problem, but imagine a case where there are thousands of records in our database. Then fetching the list of tasks can get quite slow and heavy on the database. So typically what you want to do is paginate these results. And to do this, we need to go to our index method. And instead of returning all the tasks, we want to paginate these results. Now let's make the request again and see what happens. And what you see now is that there are some extra fields added to our response. And this is because we use a collection resource. Then Laravel knows to automatically add these properties in our JSON. So it contains links for fetching the first, last, and eventually next and previous pages. And some metadata about the results that we're seeing. So our current page, what the last page is, it contains the total amount of tasks that are in our database and the amount of results that should be shown per page. With just one task, pagination is quite boring. So let's go to our editor and go to our terminal. And what we want to do is create a factory for the task model. So we use the make command to make a factory. This is going to be the task factory for the model task. And let's go there. In our definition, we want to define the fields that will be generated for this task model when we use the factory. So we need to have a title, and we will use faker to generate dummy data. And that's going to be sentence, and the is done flag we'll just set to false for now. And let's go to our Tinker shell. Create some task models. So on the task model, let's call the factory method. And let's say we want to have 50 tasks and create them. All right. Now, if we now head back to Postman and send a request, I'll see that we have some actual results to show here. So in our data, we have 15 tasks, and we can now jump to the next page, which uses the query parameter page. And you'll see that we get the next page, and let's jump to the last one, which is page 4. And you'll see that there are the remaining couple tasks. If we try to fetch the 5th page, then we'll notice that we have no results in our data. With that, I hope to see you in the next video. Now the next thing that we'll do to improve this index method is allow to filter the task collection. And for this, we're gonna pull in the Laravel Query Builder package, which allows us to conveniently do that using get query parameters. So let's copy over the composer require command and head into our terminal and install the package. Let's go back to the documentation to grab an example. So let's get this piece of code, and the import should be on top. Oh, that's one too many. All right. Now this example fetches users. We want tasks for the task model, and we have no name field on the task model. So instead we're gonna filter on the, or allow to filter on the is done field. So we can fetch completed and non-completed tasks. Now instead of get, we wanna use paginate here, so that our results are still paginated, and we need to pass this tasks variable into the task collection. Now let's head back to Postman and use this filter. So what we want to do is add the filter query parameter, and between the square brackets we add the field is done, and let's filter on 0 to get the non-completed tasks, which are all of the tasks, and add a 1 to get the completed tasks. Now this doesn't show any results for now, so let's go back into our Tinker shell and get the first task and set that one to completed. So set that value to true and save the task. If we now send this request again, then this task model shows up here, and with is done set to 0, it is now removed from these results. Pay attention that we control which filters are allowed. So if there are fields that we try to filter on that we don't allow, so let's say ID is 4, then you'll notice that we get a bad request error. And let's add the accept header here as well to get a proper errors response with JSON. We don't allow to filter on the ID, and this is properly handled by the query builder. So also note the HTTP 400 response. Now with that, I hope to see you in the next video. The next and for now final thing we'll do to improve our index method is add the ability to sort our tasks using query parameters. And this is also done using the Laravel query builder package that we used before for filtering. We will add a default sortation on the created add timestamp first. So I'll copy over this line and add it below the allowed filters. Now we can add the created add field here and see what this does in Postman. And you'll now see that the first task that we created is on top of this list. It actually was before, but let's now sort on the lastly created task first. And for this we add a hyphen, a minus sign, whatever you want to call it. And let's save this and go back to Postman. And you'll now see that the tasks that were created last are on top. And the first one that we just created should be all the way at the bottom. So let's double check that and go to the fourth page. And we'll see indeed that our first task is now shown as a last result of the task list. What we'll do next is allow to sort our tasks on the title, the is done field, and the created add field. So let's head back into our controller and add allowed sorts. And as an array, I'll pass title is done and created at. Now let's play around with this for a bit. Let's go back to Postman and add the sort query parameter. And let's first sort on the title. And this will sort the results on alphabetical order. We can reverse this order by adding a hyphen sign again, or use this as a secondary sort by adding the is done field first, and that way we first sort on is done and next on title. And you'll see not so much now. But add a hyphen before is done, and we first see the completed task, and afterwards the results are sorted on alphabetical order of the title. And just like with the filter fields, we dictate which fields are allowed to sort on. So if we want to sort on ID, for example, and run this, then we'll notice again that we get a 400 bad request response back from our API. Alright, welcome to this next section. It is time now to talk about authentication. It is pretty rare that you want to build an API that exposes all its data to the public. Instead, normally you want to do something with user accounts, and users can log in, and with an API token they can fetch data that they have access to. And to do this, we first need to prepare a bit. So what we'll do is add a creator to a task, and eventually users can only have access to the tasks that they created. Now, since this app is in development and not running in production, I'm gonna cheat a bit and change an already existing migration. So in the migration, I'll add a foreign ID, and I will call this creator ID. Now there is a convention in Laravel to actually use user ID. And if you do it like this, then Laravel understands that this is a reference to the users table. But actually, I like this a bit better because it provides some more context on what this foreign key actually means. You could, for example, think that later we want to have an assignee, which is also a user for a task, and then you would have two user IDs. And this one is a bit more descriptive. Now, I do want to add a foreign key constraint on the users table. And by doing this, we cannot add unexisting user IDs to this table. So it provides some extra security. Now, let's run the migrations from a fresh state. So this drops all the tables and runs the migrations from the start. And this also means that all our dummy data is gone now. Now, besides the migration, we need to make some changes to the task model and set up this relationship. So we'll add a function creator and add a type hint of belongs to, because a task belongs to a user. And let's return this relationship. It is a reference to the users table. So let's add the class here. And since we didn't use user ID, but used our own name for this foreign key, we'll need to add it in here of creator ID. And let's for now also remove this hidden updated at, because it doesn't serve much of a purpose anymore. Next, we need to be in our user model and set up the relationship here as well. So add a method for tasks, which returns a has many relationship. reference the task class in here, and here we also need to mention that creator ID because we didn't call it user ID. And finally we need to be in our task factory because we now added a required field creator ID, otherwise our factory doesn't work anymore. And here we need to mention the user factory. Let's now hop into our Tinker shell and let's create a task for a user. So set up this user using the factory, and for this user, via the relationship that we just created, we can create new tasks, and tasks require a title, and the title of this task will be buy hamburgers. Alright, we also now have a task, and as you see here, this task is now associated to the user because the creator ID is 1 and the ID of the user that we created is also 1. Now if we go to Postman and resend the request, now we also see that the creator ID is part of the response that we're getting back from the API. And with this, we should be ready to set up authentication in the next video. I hope to see you there. Alright, now that we did all the preparing, it's time to start with logging in with our newly created user. And for this, we will use Laravel Sanctum, which is a package that comes with Laravel. And let's head to the installation instructions. Now, Laravel Sanctum should be present in the required packages when you install your Laravel application, but if for some reason it wasn't included, you need to run the composer require command and the following steps. But if it already was, you can jump ahead to this piece with the API configuration in the HTTP kernel. So let's go there, and under the API key in the middleware groups, you see that this ensure front-end requests are stateful is commented out, and we need to enable that. Now, with that set up, we can create a new controller for our authentication. So let's run the PHP artisan make command, and we're gonna make a controller called auth controller. All right, and let's set up a route for that in our API routes. Now this is gonna be a post request, and the URI is going to be login, and as an action we want to reference the auth controller, and the action that we'll call will be named login as well. So let's go to this controller now and implement this login action. And as a parameter, it will need the standard request. All right, let's get started here. So the first thing that we want to do is validate the request data that is posted to us. So let's do that using Laravel's request validation. And what we want to check for is an email address, and this is required, and it should be a valid email address. And second, we need a password, which is required, and we're not gonna bother with minimum or maximum amount of characters here. because that's for signing up users. So next we want to check whether this user actually exists in our database. Otherwise we have nothing or no one to sign in actually. So we're gonna make an if statement for that and use the auth facade from Laravel to check if we can sign in, and we can pass the validated request data as an argument. Now if this attempt fails, then we want to return a 401 status. So add a response, and this is going to be JSON data, and as a message we'll pass login information invalid, and as a second argument to this JSON function we need to pass a status code because the default 200 is not suitable in this case. So it's going to be a 401 status. Now if this attempt did succeed, then we know that we have a valid user, so we can get the user using the email address that we received in the validated request data. So we'll find that user using the email address in the validated request data, and we'll need to add the first here, and as a response we'll add JSON again, and what we will return is the access token for this user. We'll need to create one actually. Create token, and this needs to have a name as an argument. Let's give you some more space, and we want to return the plain text token. And secondly we want to add the token type here, and this is a bearer token. And don't forget the semicolons. Alright, let's go to Postman and see how this works. So for this request we need an email, and let's use a test email for now, and a password. Right, send a request, and we get that first error message because this is not a valid user in our database. Now let's go back to the user that we just created in the previous video and use this example email address of the user that actually is in our database. Go back to Postman, use that, and also note, by the way, that in our user factory Laravel uses password as a password for all the users that are created using that factory. So we can log in like this and we get a bearer token back. Now also note that in our API routes there already was a example request added. So this will return the actually signed in user. And now that we have authentication set up, we can test this route out. So let's add a new folder in Postman for the user. And in here, add a request, which is a GET request. And that is to API/user. And in the headers, what we need first is once again the accept key, application JSON, And second is the authentication token. HTTP header is called Authorization, and we'll add bearer because we're using a bearer token, and paste in the token that we just got returned. We now send this request, then we get the user information of the user that we created, and this request is authenticated using Laravel Sanctum. Now if we keep this token out of the request, then you'll notice that we get an unauthenticated error with a 401 status code. So that seems to work alright. I hope to see you in the next video. Alright, in the previous video we did set up logging in via our API, but our task resource is still openly available. Now in order to protect these routes, we need to add a route middleware group, and we will use Auth Sanctum for that, which is the authentication middleware from Laravel. So we'll need to group this and nest all the routes in this group in here. And if we now go to our Postman client, then if we try to fetch the tasks in our API, you'll see that we get an unauthenticated message, because we are now protecting our routes using Laravel Sanctum. So what we need to do here is also add the authorization header using the API token from the user that exists in our database. And with this, we can fetch the tasks again. But there still is a problem with this, because if we are authenticated, then we can fetch the tasks, but we get the tasks from all available users. So let's demonstrate this and head into our Tinker shell and create a new task using the task factory. And as you'll see, this task is associated with another user with creator ID 2, which is not the current user that I'm signed in as. You'll notice that indeed this task is also in the list of tasks that we get returned from our API. So in order to fix this, let's add a global scope to our task model. And therefore we need to create a booted method, protected static function, booted, and in here we'll add the global query scope. And we'll do that like this, add global scope, and the scope is called creator because we want to only allow to fetch the tasks from the creator. And as an argument, it will get the query builder. That's this one. And what we need to do is filter by the creator ID. So we'll do that with a where clause. Oh, I forgot a comma here. The creator ID should be equal to the currently signed in user, and for that we use the auth facade and add a semicolon there. Now let's head back into Postman, send a request, and now you'll see that that task is removed from the list of tasks. And also if we go to our show route, you'll see that if we send a request, and now we need the authorization header here as well, then you'll notice that now we get a 404 for this route. And if we get the task that we are the creator of, then we can still fetch the result. And the same goes for the update and delete routes. With that, I hope to see you in the next video. Hello, welcome back. Now, with the implementation of the creator, there is now a bit of a problem in the store action of our tasks resource. And this is due to the fact that newly created tasks are not associated with their creator. So even if I make the request with the authorization header, you'll see an integrity constraint violation because we are not setting the creator ID of a task. So what we want to do here is to associate the newly created task with the signed in user. And therefore we need to be in our task controller. And in the store method, instead of creating the task like this, we get the user from the auth facade and create tasks via the relationship that we set up in the user model. And in here, we pass the validated data. Also note that we are not validating the creator ID. So we don't want to allow users to set a creator ID of a task in the request that they're sending, because this allows to create tasks for different users, and we don't want to allow that. So now if we go back to Postman and send the request again, then you'll see that we have a newly created task and the creator ID is the ID of the user that we currently signed in as. Hope to see you in the next video. Alright, now that we have our task controller working again, it's time to allow users to register for our API. So let's add a new route for that. And the URI is going to be register, and the action that we call in the auth controller will also be register. So let's go to our auth controller now and add this method. And again, we'll use the generic request class and start with the request validation. So the fields that we want to validate are first a name. So in our database, if I'm not mistaken, the name of a user is a required field. It is not nullable. So we need to have that, the name of the user. And this is going to be a required field. And it should have a maximum amount of characters of 255. Because again, this is the maximum amount of characters that are allowed in our database field. And for the email, we are also going to require this field. It should also be max 255 characters. And the email needs to be unique. And actually also a valid email. So let's add that first. And in the validation, we'll add unique. And this is unique in the users table and the email field. So that are arguments to the unique validator. And lastly, we are going to require a password, and that is also required. This needs to be confirmed and a minimum of 6 characters. And if that all works, then we can create the new user model with the validated data and what we will respond is basically the same as for the login method, but also let's add the user here. And actually, do we have a resource? No, we don't have a user resource. We'll add it in one of the next videos. Alright, that seems alright. And actually also use a 201 status code, HTTP status, to indicate that we just created a new user. Now, let's head to Postman and check whether this works. So this needs to be a post request, already set the accept HTTP header, and as a body we'll send JSON, and we're gonna need a name, which will be Koen, my name, an email address of koen@koen.nl, because I'm in the Netherlands. This is not a real email address, or at least not for me. And a password of password. And since we are required to confirm this password, we also need to pass password underscore confirmed, which should be the same as the password above, obviously. Now let's send this request. Confirmation. Yes, that did the trick. Now we get a user returned, newly created user with the access tokens. Now if I try to send this request again, you'll notice that the email has already been taken. And if I don't have a strong enough password, then the validator should complain about that as well. So that should be all it takes to register a new user in your API. With that, I hope to see you in the next video. Hello people, welcome back to this next section. In this section we're going to talk about relationships, and obviously not the kind you're having with a girl or a boyfriend, but we're going to create a project model and relate tasks to projects, and later on we will add users as project members. This will allow us in the next section to talk about authorization. So let's get started and use our artisan make command again to create the projects model. And besides the model, we're gonna want a controller, a migration, and a factory. So that's the C, the M, and the F flag that we're passing to this command. And let's fill in our migration first, for the projects table. Now projects are gonna have a title, which will be a required string field, and we're gonna add a foreign ID to the users table, and we will name this creator ID. So we will need to add a foreign key constraint to the users table, because we called the relation or the foreign ID creator ID and not user ID. Now with that set up, let's fill in our project factory. So the project will have a title, and we'll use faker to create some dummy data. And for the creator ID, we will reference the user factory. Now, besides this migration, we will also need another migration to relate tasks to a project. And therefore, again, we will use the artisan make command, and we will name this migration at project ID to tasks. And by using this naming convention, Laravel knows to use the tasks table in this migration. Now for tasks, we will add a project ID, which is a foreign ID, obviously. And this field is going to be nullable. So with this, we're not creating problems for tasks that are already in our database and don't have a project related to them. And this is going to be a constrained foreign ID. Now, because we use project ID here, Laravel automatically knows to reference the projects table. So unlike in the creator migration or the project migration, where we use creator ID, we manually need to set users, but we don't need it here. And in the down method, which will be called if we reverse this migration, we're gonna drop constrained foreign ID with project or column name project ID. Now with this setup, let's run our migration. All right. Now with that being done, let's move over to our models and set up the relationships. So in the users model, let's create a new method, projects. So that is plural. So you might already guess that this is a has many relation. And we will reference the project model, and the foreign key that we used was creator ID. Now let's go to our task. Oh, I forgot the braces here. Let's go to our task model, and there also let's create another method, project singular, and therefore you might already guess that this is a belongs to relation. And again, reference the project model, and we don't need to pass a column name here or foreign key because we use the project ID naming convention. And now in our project model, let's already define the fillable fields. And in there, we are gonna add the title. And for relationships, we're gonna have the tasks. And also here, again, because we use project ID, which is the naming convention in Laravel, no need to add the column ID. We're gonna need that for the creator, which is a belongs to relation. And it references the user model. All right. Now with this setup, we should be ready for the next video. I hope to see you there. All right. Now that we properly set up our relations to the project model, let's create some routes such that we can create and update projects. So let's add another API resource in our API routes file to the project controller. And next, let's do some scaffolding. We're gonna need a store request first. So let's use the artisan make command again to make this request class of store project request, and also one for updating. And we will also need a resource, which is going to be called project resource. Now, with that being done, let's move over to the project controller and implement the store and update method here. And we will use the newly created store project request. And for the update method, obviously we will use the newly created update project request, and instead of the ID we will use the route model binding from Laravel to directly get the project into this method. Now for the store method, we want to get the validated data or inputs from the request class. And if that is properly validated, then we're gonna attach this newly project to the user. And we're gonna do that using the auth facade. So this will get us the current user. And we can create the project via the relationship that we did set up. And we pass the validated data into the create method, and we will return the created project using the project resource. Now for the update method, we're basically going to do the same. So we're going to get the valid data from the update project request class. And we're gonna update the project using this data. And also here, we're gonna return the project using the project resource class that we did set up. All right, let's now move to our request classes. So first, the store project class. We're gonna authorize all requests for now, and projects require a title, so that's gonna be a required field. It is gonna be a string of maximum 255 characters. Now for our update project request, we're basically gonna do the same or close to the same. We're gonna authorize all requests, and in the validation rules, we're gonna validate the title. Now this field can be present sometimes, and if it is present, it is gonna be required. So we cannot set it to null because it is a required field in our database. And here it also needs to have a maximum of 255 characters. Next, let's test this out. So first I'm going to go into my artisan Thinker shell and make sure that I have a new user to test with. So let's use the user factory to create a new user because I emptied my database before this section. So I'll copy over the email address and log in with this user to get an API token. Now let's first do the store method. So in the headers, I need to add the authorization header. And in the body of the request, we're gonna add JSON, and for our projects we require a title. So if I now send this request, I see that I made a mistake here. So let's move back to our API routes. And here, this should be plural. So the API resource is going to be projects and not project. But hey, that's part of software development sometimes. Now I should see the validation messages. Yes. Now let's add the title of school, send this request, and now we have a newly created project in our database. Let's move over to the update request, and the project has ID 1. Also add the authorization header here and add a body JSON, and let's now set the title to university. Hope I didn't make a typo there. And that seemed to work. So now the project that we just created has an updated title of university instead of school. Alright, with that we should be ready for the next video. See you there. Hello, welcome back. In this video we're gonna associate tasks with a project. So hop into our artisan Finger shell first, and let's first get the user for which we created a project in the previous video. And for me that was the user with ID 1, and to double check this we should be allowed to see the projects of the user like this. And indeed, for this user we have a project called university. So let's create a task now using the task factory. And we're gonna create a task for this user using the creator relation that is set up in the task model, and create the task. Now you don't see it here, but this task has no project ID set for it. So let's double check in our database. And indeed, for this task, and actually all the tasks, so mind the title here, that is this record, there is no project ID field. So this task is not related to a project. So if we now move over to Postman, to the update task request, and we are gonna have task with ID 2, fill the authorization header, and try to set the project ID to 1, then you'll notice that this will not update the project ID because the project ID is not fillable. So let's move to our task model and add the project ID there. And besides this, we also don't include the project ID in the validated data or the validation rules of the task request. So even though this is here now, it is not part of the validated data in the task controller. So let's go to the update task request class and add a validation rule for the project ID. Now, because this field is nullable in our database, we also allow to set the project ID to null. And next we want to check whether the project ID exists in our database. So we're going to use the exists validation rule, which requires two parameters. The first is the table in which to check for an existing value, and the second is the column. So with this we're going to check whether the ID that is passed exists in the projects table. And if we now move back to Postman, we should be good to go. So let's try to set this project ID of 1 for task with ID 2. And now we see indeed that in our response, the project ID has been updated to a value of 1. So this does seem to work fine, but it does have a minor flaw. So to demonstrate this, let's move back into our artisan Thinker shell and create a new project using the projects factory. So if I now create this project and update the project with the new ID, which is 2, not 3, and send the request, then you now see that I can set this project ID to 2. Now this is a bit odd because the creator of the project is someone completely different from the creator of the task. And obviously that's not a good thing. We don't want to allow users to blindly attach tasks to other people's projects. So what we want to do is check whether the creator of the task was the same as the creator of the project. And for this we need to write a custom validation rule. And therefore we cannot use this string syntax, but need to use an array for the validation rules. So first we're going to have the nullable validation rule, and second we're going to add the exist validation rule again, but we're going to need to filter that on the creator ID. So again, the parameters are going to be projects for the table, ID for the column, and in here we're gonna add a closure, and the query will be filtered on the creator ID, and for this we'll use the ID of the currently signed in user using the auth facade. Now if we check again, so let's create a new project. This project has ID 3. Move back to Postman. If we now try to set the project ID to 3, then we see that the project ID is invalid. Now we do have one project created for this user. This is the project with ID 1. If we try to set this, then this does work. And also the project ID that we used before is not valid anymore. So that's working fine. Now let's copy over this logic to the stored task request such that we can set the project for newly created task and import the classes that we need for this. All right, now with this we're all good to go. I'll see you in the next video. Hello, welcome back. We have our relationships properly set up. We can store and update projects, but we cannot show them, and we can also not show the tasks related to a project, which does seem quite crucial to me. So let's get started with that. So in our project controller, let's add the show method. And in here, we're gonna need to import the request class again. And also we don't want the ID, but actually the project. And in here, let's return the project resource. So with that being done, we can already fetch projects. So if we check that out in Postman, let's add another request for that. Show, and it has the same route as the update request. It also needs the proper headers, so the accept application JSON and the authorization header for the user that I'm currently signed in as. So with that, I should be able to get a project, and indeed it does, but it doesn't show tasks. So let's add that to our project resource next. So in here, we currently just show the JSON representation, but let's set this up properly. So for projects, we're gonna want to show the ID, the title, also the created add and updated add timestamps, and these needs to be commas, not semicolons. All right, and besides these fields, we're also gonna want to show the tasks related to the project. So let's include that here. And we can use the task resource for that. So we don't need this actually. Task resource, and that is a collection. And in here we wanna get the tasks that are related to the project. And we can do that like this. All right, if we now go back to Postman and send the request, we now see that in our response, we also show the tasks of the project. Now, almost there, because if we try to fetch the project that we are not a creator of, so in this case, project with ID 2, then we can still fetch the project and the related tasks, and we don't want that. So just like before, let's go to our project, and we need to add a global scope here, and we actually did that for the task already. So let's copy that over, and if we import these classes, all right. If we now go back to Postman, try to fetch this project again, then you'll now notice that we get a 404 not found response. And with that, we're good to go. Hello, welcome back. It's now time to include a method to show the projects for a user. And for that, we first gonna add a project collection resource. And we'll use the artisan make command again to create a resource, which is gonna be called project collection. Now in our project controller, we're gonna need to add the index method. And in here, let's return the project collection. And in here, for the user, we're gonna get the projects and show a paginated result. So let's test this out in Postman. So I already went ahead and created the request here. Now let's send it, and we'll see that we get the projects returned, but they also include the tasks. And for now, this is not much of a problem, but if we have lots of projects with lots of tasks, this can be quite heavy on our database. So let's go back to our controller and use the query builder package again that we used before in the tasks controller. That's the one that we want, and we'll use it for the project class. And we are gonna allow to include tasks, but don't do it by default. So we add allowed includes and we'll pass tasks as a parameter. And we want to paginate these results. So in here, instead of that, we're going to use the projects variable. Now, if we now send the request, we still see that the tasks are present. And to fix this, we need to make changes to our project resource. Because if you go to the resource, then we see that these tasks are included by default, and we need to make this conditional. So in here, let's make a change. So instead of just getting the tasks, we only want to get the tasks when loaded. And if we now go back to Postman, get the projects, then we see that the tasks are excluded from this result. However, this creates a problem somewhere else, because if we now try to get this project in here, then those tasks are also not present anymore. So what we want to do is, in the project controller, in the show method, we want to make sure that the tasks are loaded. So for this, we wrap this in braces and load the tasks. And we do that like this. And if we now go back to Postman, send the request, then we see that the tasks are included here. If we go to our index method, then they are still excluded here. But because we do allowed includes in the query builder package, we can include them using a query parameter. Now let's send this request, and now we do see that the tasks are included if necessary. Now with that, we have the index method set up. I'll see you in the next video. Alright, welcome back. Now in order to make our project controller complete, we're currently missing out on one method, and that is the destroy method, which allows us to delete projects. So let's add that to the controller. And what we want to do here is not use the ID, but use route model binding to get the project directly. And we will return a no content response. And before that, we need to actually delete the project as well, of course. All right, so let's now move into our PHP Artisan Thinker shell and let's create some models. Now I started again with a fresh database. So first I'm gonna create another user. And let's create a project next using the project factory for this user on the creator relationship. All right, and next let's also create a task, and we're gonna associate that with both this user and this project. So for the project and for the user, and this one also needs the relationship because that one uses a different naming. All right, so now we have a task associated with this project, and it is both created by the same user. Now let's move over to Postman. First thing that we want to do is grab an API token again for this newly created user. And here we go. So let's now show this task first. It is task with ID. It does need the bearer type first. Send that, and we see that the project ID is set to 1. Next, let's delete the project. So we're using the delete HTTP method, and the ID of 1 is correct. And add the API token here and send the request. And now we get a 204 no content response, so that seems alright. And next, let's double check our task again. Send this request, and we see that something odd is happening here. The project ID is still 1, although this project doesn't exist anymore in our database. And this is because we didn't set up our foreign key constraints properly yet. So the behavior of what happens when we delete a project with tasks associated to them, for example, but also what happens to a task when the creator is deleted. We will do this in the next video. I will see you there. Hello, welcome back. Now in the last video we noticed a problem. We tried to delete a project which had tasks associated with it. Now if we deleted the project, the task was still referencing the non-existing project. Now obviously that's not a good thing. So we need to fix some stuff in our migrations here. So we need to add some rules in our database of what happens to a task when the associated project gets deleted. Now in this case, a project ID of a task is nullable. So we can safely set the value of the column project ID to null once the project gets deleted. But here we run into a issue with SQLite. In SQLite, it is not allowed or not working to add such a statement in a migration that alters a table. Only in migrations that create a table. So I'm gonna delete this line here and add it to the tasks table. And there it should work. And now I'm gonna do something pretty ugly, but our database or our project is still in development. So what I'm gonna do here is add the timestamp of the migration. This changes the order in which our migrations are run. So with this being done, we first run the create projects table and afterwards the create tasks table. And we need this because we have a foreign ID to project ID in our tasks table now. So if this were the other way around, we could not create this foreign ID because the projects table would only exist into the next migration. So that would not work. So now this migration is empty, so we can delete that. And there are other foreign key constraints in our database as well. So here we are referencing the users table. Now if we delete a user, what we want to happen to the tasks of this user is that all these tasks get deleted. So we do that by adding this cascade on delete. So the delete is cascaded to downwards models or related models. So if we would now delete the creator, the tasks that are related to this creator will also get deleted. And we will do the same for projects. So in here, also add the cascade on delete. And let's run our migrations from the start now. Now let's next test out this case that we had in the previous video. So open up the Tinker shell and let's create a project. I think that's still here. Yeah, we now have a project and let's create a task for this project. And let's now see what happens when we delete the project. So currently for this task, the project ID is 1. If we delete the project, then we need to get the task again. It is task with ID 1, and we need without global scopes here because we filter on the creator in the task model. So let's get this task now, and now we see that the project ID is set to null, so that works properly. Now let's grab the user of this task, so that is user with ID 2, and let's delete this user as well, and check for our task, and now this task doesn't exist anymore. So with the delete of the user, all its tasks are gone as well from the database. And that's what we want here. See you in the next video. Alright, welcome back to this next video. In this video we're going to look at a different kind of relation, one that's called many-to-many. Now for other types of relations, we can just set a foreign ID in the table. But if you're gonna have projects with multiple members, which are users, and users with multiple projects, you can't put that in the same table. So for this, we're gonna need to create a new model with our artisan make command. And we will name this model member. Now this is a special kind of model, and therefore we need to pass the pivot flag. And we are also gonna create a migration. Now quickly peek into this member model, and we see that it is different from other models. So in our project model, for example, we see that we extend from model, but here we extend from the pivot relation. So this is actually the name of such a table, a pivot table, where there is only 2 foreign IDs. So let's add them. We're gonna create a foreign ID to the users table. So that ID is gonna be called user ID with a foreign key constraint. And we're gonna cascade on delete. And we will add the same for the project ID. And let's run our migrations now. Alright, that table is set up. Now next we need to go to our models and set up these relations. So let's go to our projects model and add a relation to get the members of a project. And this is of type belongs to many. And we will return this like this. Belongs to many. And it is related to the user model through the member table. And the same needs to be set up in the user model. So let's go here and let's not call this member, but memberships. Import this, and instead of a belongs to many to the user model, this obviously needs to be the project model. Now with this, we should be all set up to attach users to projects as memberships. So we already had the creator, but with this we can add more users to a project. So let's test this out in our Tinker shell. Let's open up the shell and first create a project. So we're gonna have the project factory and create a project. Now this also creates the creator, so that is our first user with ID 1. And let's now create another user. So that's gonna be user 2, or actually don't need the 2 there. Create it like that. We can attach this user to this project. So we have the project under the variable B, and let's use the members relation, and to this relation we're gonna attach the user that we just created, and for this we need to pass the user ID. So let's do it like this, and pay attention to the square brackets there as well. All right, if we now check the project members, then we see that this user is a member of this project. Now with that, we're ready for the next video. I will hope to see you there. All right. In the previous video, we nicely set up this relation of project members, where we can associate multiple users to a project. Now, this is all nice and well, but we have no way of showing these project members. So let's add that as a last item of this section. So let's first grab the creator of the project that we have and sign this user in, or get an API token for this user in Postman, and grab the token and check our project. Now as you see here, bearer token, as you see here, we are not getting back the members of this project. So what we need next is a user resource. All right, now that we have that, we want to add these members to our project resource. So below the tasks, let's add members, and that's gonna use the user resource that we just created, and we only show this field conditionally when the members are loaded. So we're not gonna want to add, where is my project controller? It's over here. We are not gonna include the members in the index method, so not when we're gonna fetch a list of other projects, because that's gonna be quite heavy on our database, but only when we show a project. So let's also load that in here. Members. All right, now let's move back to Postman, send the request, and now we see that the project members are included in this response. But if we're gonna fetch the list of projects, and I need to grab the authorization token again, then you'll see that the members are not included here. So with that, we are good to go for our next section, authorization. Because now we live in a bit of an odd state, where we can have members of projects, but the members of a project cannot see tasks or can create tasks for the projects that they are a member of, unless they are the creator of the project. So we will do that in the next section. I will see you there. Hello people, welcome back to this next section. In the previous section we left in this state, where we had a project with a project member attached to it. Now the creator of the project could fetch the project from our API. But if I now log in as the other user, which is a member of this project, and log this user in, so I will retrieve an API token for this user, then we will see that we get a 404 response. And here you go. Indeed, this project member cannot fetch the project from our API. And this is due to the global query scope in our project model. So this is a good time to talk about authorization, meaning the access we give users to models in our database. Now, if we quickly go to the Laravel documentation and go to authorization, we see that Laravel has two mechanisms for this, for managing authorization. The first is gates and the second is policies. And during this section, we will focus only on policies. So let's go ahead and we will create a policy for our project model. And we will make a policy using the artisan make command. And we will call this the project policy. And we will specify the model as an argument to this command as well. So we set the model to project. And now we get a new policies folder in our app directory, and there is a project policy, as you see. Now, next, what we need to do is go to the auth service provider and register the policy that we just created. So in here, we will first add the model, which is project. And for that, we will set the project policy. All right, let's clean up this line and go to our project controller. In the project controller, we need to make it known to Laravel that the project resource should be authorized using the project policy that we just created. And we do that by adding a constructor to this controller. And in here, what we want is to authorize the resource, and we pass the class of the project as a first argument. And second, we need to pass the route parameter. So if we go to our route list command, you'll see that the project ID is called project in our routes. And we will use that name here as a second argument to this method. So if we now go to the project model and quickly comment out the global query scope, so that for now all users can view the projects, not only the creators. And with that, we can use the project policy to manage the access. So in this view method, which determines whether a user can view the model, we add this creator check again. So the user parameter that is passed in this method is the currently signed in user. So let's check whether that ID is the same as the creator ID of the project. Now, if this test passes, then the user should be able to see the project. If it doesn't, then it is unauthorized, or the user is unauthorized to see this project. So let's go back to Postman again and send a request. And now we get a different error response. So instead of the 404, we now get a 403 forbidden. So we disabled the global query scope, which made sure that we did not get that 404 error again. But the policy is now authorizing access to this model. And the current signed in user is a member and not a creator. And therefore we get a 403 forbidden response. So let's go back to the policy again and make sure that project members have access to the project as well. So the first case that we're having here is the one of the creator. So if the user or the currently signed in user is the creator of the project, then that user definitely has access to view this project model. The second case is whether the user is a member of the project. So we will check the memberships relation that we have on the user, and we will check whether that contains the project. In that case, we will return true as well. So by doing this, project members also have view access to this project model. And in all other cases, we're gonna return false. So this allows access to the project. So let's test this out one more time in Postman. Now, previously this action was unauthorized for the project member and sent a request again. And now this user that is a member has access to the project too. And let's double check for a new user. So let's go into our Tinker shell and create a new user using the user factory. And this user is not a member of the project and also not the creator. So let's log in this user, grab the access token, and let's try. And now we see that for this user that is not a creator and not a member of the project, this action is unauthorized, as it should be. And with that, I will see you in the next video. Hello, welcome back. In the previous video, we did add the project policy to our task manager. But if we now go to Postman and try to fetch all the projects in our application, and let me make sure that we use this authorization token, then you will see that we get an error. So we did not fully implement this policy yet. Whether we can view a list of projects is managed using the view any policy option. Now this policy option must return a boolean, and that is currently not there. So let's now set that to true and make this request again. So let's send it. And now we do get a list of projects, but we see that as this user, we can fetch a list of all the projects, but we are not the creator and not a member of this project. So if we peek into the show method and try to fetch this project with this user, so that is project with ID 1, we see that this action is unauthorized. So this is not a good thing, obviously, but this is due to the fact that we commented out our global query scope in the project model. So let's fix that in this video. So if we go back to our editor and peek in the project model, we see that we currently have this add global scope here. Now, this query builder checks whether the signed in user is the creator of the project. Now, if we would also have to check for a membership, this query could become quite complex. So instead, what we're going to do is add a model observer and add the creator of the project as a member too. So the creator will be both the creator of the project and also a member of the project. So let's create this observer using our artisan make command. And this observer is going to be called project observer, and we will make it for the model project. So now in our app directory, we get a new folder, observers, and there we find the project observer. What observer classes allow us to do is to hook into certain events of the project model or any other model and run some code after this event has happened. So in our case, what we want to do is add the creator as a member once the project has been created. So in this created method, what we're going to do is get the project, and to the members we're gonna attach the ID of the creator. So in here we'll pass it as an array. We're gonna add the creator ID of the project to the members relationship. Now, next thing that we need to do is actually register this observer. So currently this observer doesn't do anything. It will only be in effect once we added it to the event service provider in the boot method. So let's add the following line in here. For the projects model, we want to observe using the project observer. Alright, let's now go to our project model and fix this global query scope. So instead of creator, the name of this query scope will be member. And next, instead of where, we're gonna use where relation members user ID of ID. So what this actually means is that in the members relation we're looking for a user ID that is equal to the ID of the currently signed in user. So let's start with a fresh database. And test this out. So we'll hop into our Tinker shell and create a new project using the project factory. And actually assign this to a variable as well. For this project, let's check whether we can get the members. And in the project members, we now see that there is also a user with ID 1, which is also the user ID of the creator of the project. And now that creators are also members, we can go back to our project policy and actually simplify this permission on whether a user can view a project. Because now the creator is also a member, we can simply return this line and remove the if statements above. So now the creator of a project is always part of the members of a project as well. We can simply check whether a user is a member of a project, and that determines whether a user can view the project. Now that seems to be working all right. With that, I hope to see you in the next video. Alright, welcome back. In this video, it's time to add the remaining policy options to our project policy. So in here, for the create method, we're just gonna return true. So every signed in user will have the permission to create a project. And for the update and delete method, we're gonna check whether the user is the creator of the project using the creator ID of the project. So with this being done, only the creator of a project can update or delete the project. And furthermore, the restore and force delete, we will just set to false for now. We are currently not using this, but later on, this is used when we add soft deletes. So when you delete a model now, it is actually gone from our database. But we can also add soft deletes, which adds a timestamp the moment that the project was deleted. By doing that, it is kept out of our query results, but the project will be maintained in the database so that we can restore it later if we want to. Now, in order to test this out, let's create a new user like that. And we're gonna attach this user as a member to the project that we created in the previous video. Now let's grab the email address of the user that we just created and go over to Postman and sign in this user. So we have an access token now. If we try to show the project that we created, then we should see the response. And in the members of the project, we see both the creator with ID 1 and the current member that we signed in as with ID 2. Now, if we try to delete this project, for example, then we get a 403 forbidden response code because we are now not the creator of the project. But let's try to create one as this user. And in the body it has school as title, that's fine. Then we have a new project now with ID 2. And since we are the creator of this project, we can delete it again. And here we go. No content response. The project is now deleted from our database. And the same goes for updating. We're using the same logic there. So this user cannot update this project. And let's grab the right access token. We cannot update this project, but the creator can. And with that, I will see you in the next video. Hello, welcome back. In the previous videos, we did set up the membership relation for projects. Using this membership relation, we can attach other users to projects. However, these project members cannot attach tasks to a project. So that membership is not of much use at the time. So in this video, we want to change that. So in my database, I have a user with ID 2, which is a member of project with ID 1. And to show this, I need to log in as this user. Log in using ID 2. Otherwise, we cannot see the project due to the global query scope. So if we now check the memberships of this user, then we see that indeed this user is a member of project of ID 1, but this user is not the creator. That is the creator with ID 1. Or the user with ID 1. So if we go over to Postman and first grab the email address of this user to get an authentication token. I think this is already, yeah, that's already the correct email address. Then go to our task requests and first set this correct token. If we now in the body add the project ID of 1, then you'll notice that we get a validation error saying that the project ID is invalid, although we are a member of this project. So we need to adjust these validation rules, and therefore we need to be in the store task request and the update task request. Instead of this exist rule, we want to check whether the ID of the project that was passed in the request is an ID of a project that the user is a member of. And remember, the creator of a project is also a member. Therefore, we can do this. So let's change this rule. So instead of exist, we're going to use in, and we first get the currently signed in user, get memberships of this user and plug the IDs of the projects that the user is a member of. Now let's copy over this rule in the update task request. And let's go back to Postman. Now by changing this rule, this should work again. So I send a request and now we can create a task for a project that we are not a creator of, but just a member. So that seems to work fine. I will see you in the next video where we start to implement a task policy. Alright, welcome back. Now that we allow members of a project to create tasks for someone else's project, it is time to add a task policy, such that we can manage the authorization of tasks. Because now we can add tasks, but the creator of a project and other project members cannot see someone else's tasks. So let's go ahead and create the task policy using the artisan make command. And this one is going to be called task policy for the model task. And we will go to our auth service provider, and just like what we did for the project, we will add the task policy in here for the task model. And next we need to be in our task controller and also make known to Laravel that we want to authorize the task resource using the task policy. And we do that by adding a constructor to this controller and call authorize resource. And the model is going to be the task, and the second argument is going to be the name of the route parameter. So let's check out our route list command again, and we see that the parameter name is called task for these routes. So we will add that as a second argument to this authorize resource method. With that, we got our policy up and running. So let's implement that now. First, the view any. We will set this to true, which will allow users to fetch a list of tasks. Now, the view is going to be a more complicated one, so we'll save that for last. We allow all signed in users to create a task, and for the update and delete method, we will only allow the creator of the task to perform these actions. So let's check whether the ID of the user is equal to the creator ID of the task. And these two methods are for soft deletes, and we will ignore those for now. So I'll set them to false. And last, let's go into this view method, which determines whether a user can view a certain task. The first check is obviously whether the user is the creator of the task. In that case, the user can view the task. So let's check whether the user ID is equal to the creator ID of the task. And in that case, we're gonna return true. Now, second, we want to check whether the task is related to a project, and if it is, we're gonna check whether the user is part of that project. So let's add another if check, and we first gonna check whether the task has a project, and if there is no project associated, this value will be null. And the second part is gonna be whether the user is a member of the project of the task. So let's get the memberships and check whether it contains the project of the task. In that case, we also want to return true. So this allows members of a project to view all the tasks of a project. And otherwise, we're going to return false. Now, with that being done, we need to move to our task model and adjust the global query scope, just like we did for the projects, and check for a membership. So instead of the creator name, we're going to change this to member. And the query is going to be a bit more complex. So this part maintains. So if the currently signed in user is the creator of the task, then it can see the task. And second, we're going to add a or where in and check whether the project ID is part of the memberships of the user. So we're gonna get the currently signed in user using the auth facade, get the memberships of the user, and plug all the project IDs. So let's move into our artisan finger shell and create a new project. So now we have a new project, and this project was created by the user with ID 3. And let's now also create a new user. Once again, using the user factory. And we're gonna attach this user to the project members. And I'll just pass 4 because that's the ID of the new user, and grab the email address of this user and go to Postman. So log in with this user, get an access token, and create a new task for this project using the store method. First set the authorization header, and instead of wait for migrate, let's call it do homework. If I now send this request, change the project ID, which was project 3. Send request, and now we have a new task in this project, and this task was created by creator or user with ID 4. If I now get the creator of the project, which was not the creator of this task, and use this email address to sign in, then I should be able to show this task. So I'll change the bearer token, quickly pick the ID of the project or of the task, which is 2. And now here you go. As this user, which is not the creator of the task, I can view the task, but if I would try to update the task, set the header again, change the title to sign up for exam, then we'll notice that we're not not authorized. But if we once for one more time, grab the token of the creator of the task. Then we should be able to do this. And with that, we should be good to go for authorization on the task model. I will see you in the next video.